You're listening to Science and Saucery, a show dedicated to adding life to your years. And now your hosts, registered dietitian Juliana Hever and scientist Ray Cronice.
Welcome.
Hello, hello.
How are you doing today?
I'm great, Raymond James. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Everybody loved the erection doctor last week.
Yeah, she's amazing. We love her too.
And I think they're going to like our guest today.
We have we have double trouble, extraordinary.
Double trouble.
This power duo that is taking diabetes by storm and helping people when they felt they couldn't be helped. And like if there's so much passion from these two men that are so inspiring that everyone will get a lot out of this episode, no matter what.
It's really great. When I first met Cyrus, he's got a PhD in nutritional biochemistry from Berkeley, and he was one of the first people that I really got to geek out. So we spent way too much time on the phone geeking out about all these things, and it was right, because you spend so much time arguing with people and debating people to have someone finally that gets it. And then I wanted to meet Robby forever. And then finally at that Veg Fest or something in Los Angeles, there he was standing in the corner cutting mangoes for everybody. So,
of course.
So, it's really, it's great to have them on today, and we're going to let them introduce themselves. So let's bring them on today. Welcome, guys.
Thanks so much, guys. We appreciate being here.
It's really an honor. You guys are such an inspiration.
Oh, thank you. You guys are too. And so, why don't you real quick give us the quick background that both of you guys have a similar story as type 1 diabetics, and how you landed into eating nothing but fruits. It's a great
for sure.
story.
There's actually some cool stories. Before I get into that, I also want to say that I remember that very first conversation that I had with you on the phone. And I remember taking a look at my phone afterwards, and we had talked for 3 hours and 18 minutes.
Yeah, that's not uncommon.
And I was like, oh, wow. I've been talked to a lot of scientists before, but I'm pretty sure Ray is the smartest human being that I know.
Thank you.
That I agree with that. And that is a very typical length of conversation. It's like a Ray effect. And I also have to say that I had the same thing with you guys in reverse, because I've known Robby for many, many years, since I went plant-based from the beginning. And I mean, I have so much love for this man, and I wanted to meet Cyrus too. So it's so exciting when you guys came together, and your messages are so powerful and synergistic together. So yeah, why don't you share your stories?
For sure. Okay. So I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 22. I grew up as an athlete. I've been a soccer player, and I've lifted weights and ran cross country and played baseball. And so, I've always been slender, and out of nowhere, all of a sudden I started feeling really thirsty. I couldn't concentrate properly. And I was urinating 17 to 20 times per day while I was drinking about 1.5 to 2 gallons of water per day. So I knew something was wrong. I picked up the phone. I called my sister, who's a doctor of osteopathy, and I explained my symptoms to her, and she started crying. And she said, Cyrus, go straight to the medical center right now. You have type 1 diabetes. And I turned to her and I was like, Shanaz, I don't have type 1 diabetes. What are you talking? I don't even know what diabetes is, but I know that it has something to do with old people and cake.
Yeah.
And she was like, Cyrus, I don't have time to explain. Just go straight to the health center. So I dropped everything. I went to the health center. They checked me in. They checked my blood glucose, and I was in the 600s.
Wow.
So
Wow.
blood glucose,
Scary.
just for context, is supposed to be between about 70 and 130, or maybe 80, 130. And I was like 6 times higher than I was supposed to be. So again, this is all Greek to me. I don't know anything about human biology at this point in my life. So they take me to the hospital. They give me an IV of saline in one arm. They give me an IV of insulin into the other. And over the course of 24 hours, they bring my blood glucose down.
Weren't you working at Ames at that time?
So this was right before I began working at NASA. So this is
great.
So
we share a NASA past. Go ahead.
Exactly right. So this is, senior year of college, as I'm, just about to transition out of college to go into the real world. And so while I was in the hospital, the doctors diagnosed me with not 1, not 2, but 3 autoimmune conditions. The first one was Hashimoto's hypothyroidism, which I had developed about 6 months prior. Then I developed alopecia universalis, which is why I have no eyebrows, no ear hair, no nose hair, no eyelashes, just literally 0 hairs on my body. And then
That's
the third
two
one,
autoimmune diseases.
2 autoimmune diseases within months. And then the third one was type 1 diabetes, which is an autoimmune disease as well.
Right.
So all 3 of those set in within a 6-month period. And the doctors, literally a doctor came into my room and he was like, you know what? You have what's known as a polyglandular autoimmune syndrome. And we've never seen someone with this combination of autoimmunity or autoimmune conditions. Do you mind if we talk about you at our next huddle?
Mm.
And I said, sure, you can do whatever you want. You know, I'm glad that I'm interesting, but it didn't really give me very much confidence to know that they knew exactly what to tell me. So the only thing they could tell me was that because I have type 1 diabetes, I must eat a low carbohydrate diet, because that's the only way to control my blood glucose. And that's the only way to prevent me from using more and more and more insulin over the course of time. So again, I didn't know anything about biology. And I said, great, sounds good. I will eat more turkey and fish and butter and chicken and eggs. Easy. So I went home and I continued, and I did exactly that. I continued to play sports. I got a job working at NASA. I was there for, 2 years, and I was just like trying to live my life as an independent guy. And my health got worse. I thought it was pretty junky to begin with, but it got worse. My energy levels went way down. My muscles started to hurt. My joints started to hurt. I couldn't exercise the way I wanted to. My blood glucose was such a disaster. It was embarrassing. And in addition to that, my insulin use was also climbing. It was going from 25 units a day to 32 to 35 to 39 to 42 to 45. Sometimes I would be injecting 50 units of insulin per day. And I knew that something was just not right. And I just couldn't put a finger on it because I didn't really have the science to back it up or to sort of explain it. So I went online and I started talking with people. And I met a guy who was living in San Francisco at the time. And he said, hey, you should talk to this guy named Doug Graham. So I started doing some research, and it turns out Doug Graham is a guy who teaches people how to eat a fruitarian diet. And, he teaches basically how to eat a plant-based diet, but do so using predominantly fruits. And I said, great, sounds like a plan. Can you help me out? And he said, yes, I can absolutely help you out. And I'm going to show you how you can dramatically reduce the amount of insulin you're using and get much better blood glucose. And you're going to do it in a very counterintuitive way. So under his guidance at a retreat for 7 days, he taught me how to eat a lot of fruits and a lot of vegetables. And I know, Ray, you and I have talked about this 1,000 times. We don't want to necessarily use the words carbohydrate and fat and protein, but in this context, it's important just because people with diabetes pay attention to those things. And effectively what I was doing was eating 6 times the carbohydrate value of my previous low carbohydrate diet. Right. So I went from eating, 100 grams of carbohydrate to 600 grams of carbohydrate, and my insulin use went the opposite direction. So effectively I was eating 6 times the amount of carbohydrate for 40% less insulin. And as a result of that, I was like, oh my God, I feel better. I'm more hydrated. I can sleep better. I'm urinating or less frequently. I'm going to the bathroom regularly. And I can play sports again, and my blood glucose is very controllable.
Which is completely antithetical. Yeah, and this is a complete antithetical perspective on what you're taught in nutrition school and what to do with someone that comes in with diabetes. Like the complete opposite. It's all about the carbohydrate counting. It's all about minimizing quote unquote carbs, which is why we're so, trying to get rid of this language because it's so confusing. And your results, I mean, that's extraordinary. You must have been ecstatic to finally have some guidance and some relief.
I mean, it literally felt like I took like an iPhone charger and stuck it into a wall outlet, and it was like charging my body with a ton of energy. I felt electrified. Yeah. And it was such an incredible feeling to not only feel it, but then also to look at my blood glucose meter and see an in-range value after in-range value after in-range value, just like on repeat. And then in addition to that, my insulin use went from 42 to 37 to 36 to 32 to 27 to 23 units. And that happened within 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. A friend of mine had the same thing happen with her son. And I watched this whole process go out from the reality of the getting the diagnosis and all of those things of that he went through. It was really, really, it sounds a lot like the story you guys had. So
for sure. So then I got so excited by this experiment that was happening inside of my own body that I wanted to learn the science of biology and biochemistry. So I went back to graduate school at UC Berkeley, and there I studied for 5.5 years to get a PhD in nutritional biochemistry so that I could explain what was happening inside of my own body, but then also extrapolate that and try and find out if the phenomenon that I was experiencing was also applicable to other people with type 1 diabetes, to other people with type 2 diabetes, and to people who don't even have diabetes at the same time. I had a very strong suspicion that what I was experiencing with this, dramatic improvement in my carbohydrate tolerance or my ability to consume, fresh, whole, ripe fruits and vegetables was something that applied to the general population, but I just didn't have the words to describe it. So while I was at school, I uncovered a lot of phenomenally very fundamental information about glucose metabolism and learned a couple of things. Number one, I am not a freak of nature. I mean, I am for many other reasons, but not for this.
No, only in a good way.
Exactly. As far as my glucose metabolism is concerned, I'm not a freak of nature. What's happening inside of my body on a daily basis has been described in the medical literature for over 100 years. And Ray knows this information inside and out, starting back in the early 1900s with fundamental experiments that were happening inside of animals and in humans that then progressed onto, the 2020, here we are now. Yeah. So we're talking about 100 years worth of scientific information that clearly describes the molecular mechanisms underlying insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity. And yet the thing that's really very interesting to me is that we have this incredible body of knowledge about exactly how to eat to maximize your insulin sensitivity and reverse the very condition that sets the stage for high blood glucose. But yet what people do in the outside world is, just like Juliana was saying earlier, exactly the opposite. Yes. It is exactly the opposite.
Yeah, the goal, the end point is always how do we impact your life as little as possible? In other words, we want the goal to be we just want you to live a normal, unhealthy life, And so, I think what the question that both of you guys are toying around is, something with Jeffrey Rose's article, 6 Population, 6 Health. I've talked about this a lot recently, which is the doctor doesn't ask, why did this patient get this disease at this time? We don't ask that anymore. First, at the highest level, it's what litigious thing do we do to protect ourselves from getting sued? What's the generally accepted practice? We're going to do that. And then back to this, which is the third part, I call them the client, not the patient, but the client that comes in has a need, and most clients' need is, I don't want to impact my life. I have this diagnosis. That's the biggest impact. Don't make me change anything else. And this is, this right. is, I think, what you see that's similar about your guys' stories.
I fully agree with you, because I had to make a decision when I transitioned, when I felt electrified after that 1 week with Doug Graham. I came back to my normal life and I had to make a very hard decision. And the decision was, am I willing to change my lifestyle and to really fundamentally change the foods that I'm eating on a daily basis and change the entire infrastructure associated with that? Am I willing to put in that effort in order to attain better health? And even though it was like a difficult question to ask, for me, it was a no-brainer. It was an absolute no-brainer, because I prioritize my health. And if, I don't like having a headache, I don't like being dehydrated, I don't like having high blood glucose, I don't like having low energy. Mm-hmm. And so if any of those things set in, then it's a trigger for me to say, you know what? I am going to change, and I'm going to change something. And even if it inconveniences me, I don't care.
Pain is a very powerful motivator.
Yeah, people run from pain and run towards pleasure. Run from pain, run towards pleasure. And so, Robby, tell us, how did your diabetes, how did that come about, and how did you end up the Ken doll perfect guy that you are.
Literally.
He is.
A very similar story to Cyrus in just the whole transformation about insulin use and carbohydrate intake. But I have two older brothers, and the middle brother was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 9 years prior to me.
Okay.
So I was familiar with type 1. I understood the condition. And I told my mom, I said, Mom, I'm going to the bathroom all the time. I'm thirsty like crazy. I think I have diabetes. She said, no, don't be silly. You don't have diabetes. Come on. So she was left town to go to Florida with my dad. They were looking at homes, and we were going to move there from St. Cloud, Minnesota. And she called to check in and said, hey, how are things going? I said, Mom, I couldn't sleep last night. I was cramping the whole time. She said, okay, go upstairs, use your brother's meter and test yourself. And I was well over 400. And just like Cyrus said, you're supposed to be between like 80 and 130. So it's 4 times higher than it should be. And he said right then and there, you have type 1 diabetes, pack your bag. You're going to be in the hospital for a few nights. So we went to the general doctor, got the diagnosis there. It was the first time I saw my brother cry. He was like, oh, I'm just so sorry you have to deal with this. And I remember my parents coming back the next night saying, it's okay. It's just going to be an inconvenience. You can still live life to the fullest and you can achieve all your dreams. So that was my initial journey with type 1.
How old were you when you got diagnosed?
I was 12, just about to turn 13.
Oh.
Wow.
This is January 26th. So this was 20 years ago now, just this past January, just very recently.
Crazy.
So I was living in Minnesota, and my parents wanted my brother and I both to have the best medical care possible. So we went to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. I had an endocrinologist. I had a nutritionist. I had a therapist. There was all this care. But in hindsight, there was no talk about reversing insulin resistance. There was no talk about, reducing your long-term complications. The whole focus was trying to make me feel normal. Hey, you're 12 years old. You're in middle school. Just eat whatever you want. Learn how to take insulin. You can be just like your friends. And that's an unfortunate situation, which obviously we're trying to do something different with our education and our book and really empowering people. A diagnosis could be a great time to turn things around. So I continue to follow the standard American diet as I was told from the nutritionist, follow just the food pyramid.
Food doesn't make a difference. You should know
it's
that.
Crazy. It's just what Juliana said.
This has nothing to do with food. This is a diagnosis. It has nothing at all to do with food.
Oh, unbelievable. So just count your carbohydrates and follow the food pyramid. I remember I was supposed to have a serving of fruit at dinner all the time. So my mom would give me mandarin oranges in a can with a bunch of syrup in there, like the sugar. It tasted great. I loved it, but it's just amazing that was my fruit serving. Yeah. So as a teenager, I developed cystic acne, which was very frustrating. And I tried everything to treat this. I mean, we're talking pills, creams, microdermabrasion treatments, laser treatments. Eventually they put me on Accutane, which is the most serious drug you can possibly take for acne. Your parents have to sign a waiver because people have committed suicide on that drug. So I just had no choice at that point. I had plantar fasciitis, so I wore these big blue boots at night because I had this painful condition in my feet, which was frustrating as a competitive tennis player. I had warts on my feet. I had chronic allergies, even though I took Nasonex and Claritin D. It was just frustrating. So I had standard American symptoms. And the thing that changed my life was a book that fell off the shelf at Barnes & Noble when I was in high school. I'm not recommending this book. A lot of you might remember it. It's called Kevin Trudeau's Natural Cures They Don't Want You to Know About. Oh my gosh, he's got a Kevin Trudeau book. That is a riot.
I picked this up right when I started my whole weight loss journey in 2007. So how funny is that?
He was everywhere, man. Infomercials.
Isn't that crazy?
I mean,
I had to get this off the shelf and pull it up here for you.
That is too good. That's too good. So this book plants a seed in my mind that, you know what, maybe it's possible to get my beta cells to work again and to reverse type 1 diabetes. That was the mindset that I left. And I said, you know what, I'm going to do everything I can possibly do to be as healthy as humanly possible and give my body the chance to restore the beta cells. That was my goal. So this sent me on a mission to learn and learn and learn and apply whatever I learned. So that led me to discover the Weston A. Price Foundation. I tried that diet. That was a bunch of grass-fed beef. I eliminated a lot of processed foods. I had to have raw milk because they said that was the best. So I would go to the local farmer's market and I would purchase milk for cats because you can't sell raw milk to humans.
Is that not the greatest fact?
That's great.
You drink milk for cats.
I mean, you got to do what you got to do. So
At least it wasn't cat milk.
I didn't see.
I know. I thought you were saying cat milk.
That's good. That's funny. And I didn't see any significant change in my diabetes health. The next thing I learned about was a Gabriel Cousens style phase 1 diet. At that point, ketogenic diets weren't popular, but that's exactly what it was. It was a plant-based ketogenic diet. And I did that. So there I'm eating lots of olive oil, lots of nuts and seeds. There were lots of greens, the celery, almond butter, a little bit of non-starchy vegetables like bell peppers. And I did that. My insulin requirements did fall. So when you stop eating carbohydrates, you don't need as much insulin. Like the total carbohydrate content per day was roughly 80 to 90 because that's including fiber. When you take that out, we're talking about 30 grams of net carbohydrate content on that diet. And when I was doing this, I had no energy. That was my biggest problem. So I'm a freshman at the University of Florida on campus, having several instances of blacking out, and I was just frustrated. All my friends are going to the cafeteria, eating whatever they want. They don't have any problems. I'm working super hard to do this, and I feel terrible. I'm losing weight. I go back to my naturopath that I had seen throughout high school, and I ask her, what's next? What can I do? And she said, you know what? Maybe it's time to try some chelation therapy. Maybe we got to do some heavy metal detoxing or something like that. I was like, okay, let me think about it. And I would be driving to Gainesville, Florida, to Tampa, Florida to do this. And I was really thinking about it, but I heard a podcast, and this podcast changed my life, which is kind of funny because as we're doing this book promotion, we're doing a lot of podcasts. And I always think, you know what, maybe somebody on the other end is having the same experience I had. A podcast is changing their life, because this guy Doug Graham was on the podcast talking about his book that was coming out. So this is September of 2006. And he's talking about his 80-10-10 diet book, which came out in December. Mm-hmm. And it just resonated with me. What he was saying resonated. And he was like talking about, this fruit and vegetable thing could basically help you cleanse certain heavy metals and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I get to eat fruit again, and I don't have to drive all the way to Tampa and pay all this money to do this chelation therapy. Like, I'm going to give this thing a shot. I want to do this. And there was a gap between September of hearing the podcast and me getting the book in my hands. So I was trying to figure it out on my own. I found some old school stuff talking Victoria Botanco, green smoothies, Frederick Pattenude. He had some material with Doug Graham. And I was just trying to figure this out and learn. Eventually, December 2006, the book gets in my hands, and no other than Cyrus Khambatta is a testimonial in the back of the book. So as a type 1, seeing another person with type 1 diabetes following this and having a great experience, this was very inspiring. I went to Google. I searched his name. I saw pictures of him being a fantastic athlete. This guy's ripped. This was with Organic Athlete at the time, which is a cool organization. And I was just like, I'm going to do this. And I signed up for a coaching program with Doug Graham, a 90-day coaching program. I emailed him every single day for 90 days. He emailed me back every single day for 90 days. And I just learned how to do this. And the transformation was profound. If you look at it, I know your audience is really smart and you guys get a lot of the nuances. So if the change in insulin sensitivity, or more accurately, glucose tolerance, was a 900% change. So you can use an app like Chronometer, and you can figure out exactly how much glucose you're consuming by subtracting the fiber, taking sucrose, dividing it by 2, and just removing fructose. Right. And you can figure out exactly how much glucose you're consuming. And when I was doing the Gabriel Cousens approach, you take out the fiber, you take out fructose, take out half of sucrose, you're left with a 1-to-1 carbohydrate to insulin ratio over a 24-hour period. Now, on the diet I'm consuming, I'm eating over 700 grams of total carbohydrate, which ends up being like roughly 270-ish grams of glucose. And I'm taking about 27 units of insulin per day. So now you're talking about like a 10-to-1 ratio, essentially. I might have the math wrong there, but I promise you it's right on my slides when I calculated all this. It's 10-to-1, okay? Roughly 10-to-1. It's different every single day for a type 1. That's a profound experience. So I'm a freshman at the University of Florida. I have access to all the peer-reviewed literature, and I get to go look at this. And I find that this stuff has been documented for almost 100 years, that when people eat more carbohydrate-rich food and reduce their fat intake, insulin sensitivity improves repeatedly. So my cystic acne disappears. My plantar fasciitis goes away. I no longer take any other medications other than insulin. I don't have any warts on my feet. I have more energy than ever. I use a physiologically normal amount of insulin. I get loads of fiber, loads of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. The food I'm eating is loaded with the purest water you can consume, which is in whole foods. And I just love this lifestyle. So now I'm excited that we're getting it out there with this book, Mastering Diabetes.
So that begs the question, everyone is out there wondering right now, what do you guys eat?
Well, we've developed a traffic light food system to explain and make it really easy to decide what foods to eat. So I'll explain that, and then we could probably say exactly what we will individually eat. So at Mastering Diabetes, we have a green light, yellow light, and red light category. In the green light foods here, these are foods that you can eat in large quantities when you're hungry till you're satisfied. So this is fruits. These are starchy vegetables. These are beans, intact whole grains. And then you have non-starchy vegetables, leafy greens, herbs and spices, and mushrooms. So the first four categories are very important there. And they are all carbohydrate-rich foods that are high in their calorie density compared to the non-starchy vegetables and the leafy greens. You have to have enough calories if you want to sustain yourself on a healthy plant-based diet. So those are the foods in the green light category, and you want to focus on filling up the first four categories: fruits, starchy vegetables, legumes, intact whole grains. Then add in lots of non-starchy vegetables, lots of greens. I don't eat a single meal without greens. Herbs and spices and mushrooms to your delight. Now, the yellow light category, this is where you're going to see two different types of foods. Foods that are either higher in their total fat content or foods that are a little bit more processed. Okay? So that's nuts and seeds, avocado, olives, coconut meat, and soy products. So the most whole intact form of a soy product would be eating edamame. Then you would go to tempeh, then you'd go to tofu. Those are all great foods. Nuts and seeds, those are all healthy and important. But the point is, just be cognizant of how much of those foods you're consuming if you want to maximize your insulin sensitivity and reverse insulin resistance. Okay? And then we have a little bit more processed foods in the yellow light category. Things like brown rice, pasta would fit in there. Ezekiel bread, some of these really clean, whole grain breads. They're cool, they're good, but they're just a little bit more processed. And especially on the bread front, they're a little bit more calorie dense, meaning that you will get more calories in your body without feeling as full. When you eat millet instead of millet bread, you get to eat a larger volume of the millet and you're going to get less calories. So that's the important point in the yellow light category. Red light foods, we're suggesting people minimize or avoid altogether. That is animal products, red meat, white meat. We have eggs in there, dairy, fish. Those are foods we want to minimize or avoid. And then we also have just the highly processed foods, just to make it clear as day, so people know exactly what to do.
And butters and all those things.
And all the plant-based stuff, Impossible burgers.
Exactly.
All that stuff. It's great for maybe animals, environment, but as far as health, that's not going to help you get to where you're looking.
Let's refer to those as processed vegan food.
There you go.
Perfect.
Yeah, we call them vegan junk food.
We call them vegan junk food.
Or whatever burgers.
Yeah, whatever burgers.
That's
Yeah, it's brilliant.
But, and when we think about this, first of all, back to the thing you said earlier, Cyrus, about the macro confusion, both glycemic index and carbohydrate have been so misused because both of these are absolutely critical terms when we're talking about dosing insulin. But they're almost irrelevant when talking about health. And so what ends up happening is you guys it's true that you have a need to carb count in the sense of dosing insulin properly. But at the same time, I think it's fascinating, as Robby was saying, that you're allowed to eat so many more starchy foods and fruits without a concern, and especially without using the extra insulin, which, like he said, for nearly 100 years, we've known about the Straub-Taubat effect, which is this: each successive bolus of glucose takes less insulin as the day goes on, and you guys see that. And, one thing from the history books when we talked about those that you can think about is that during that time, the goal of most of the diabetes research was for people to eat more starchy vegetables and more staples because people found those as comfort food, et cetera, and then putting them on these Allen kind of diets that were all animal source food or a keto diet today was something they were trying to avoid and get away from because people were having such bad times with those. They were getting sick. They had other kinds of issues. And so today I find it interesting that everybody wants to turn it around. And the analogy that we always use is fasting glucose and hemoglobin A1C are biomarkers for a dysfunctional carbohydrate system. Think of it as a traffic ticket or accidents are biomarkers for a bad driver. If you take away the car or the carb and then look at the driving record in 6 months, what have you really demonstrated? Because these are indication, just like, is he a good driver? No, he's not a good driver. He's just not in a car. And so of course he has no accidents or driving or tickets, So, and the same thing goes, hemoglobin A1C and fasting glucose are normalized, but so what? You're not eating starchy vegetables and fruits. And so if the goal is just to master the biomarker and not look at the bigger thing of health or food, enjoyment, et cetera, if that's just it to maximize the biomarker, then it's really easy to just identify these food groups as villains and let's just take those away. And likewise, I would say the same thing about protein. The idea that flesh equals protein is just a crazy idea, but a lot of people think that that's true. At the same time, what we want to do in our health span diet, where we overlap with a Mastering Diabetes diet, is that we want to minimize, certain amino acids and certain components of these building blocks of proteins because they accelerate aging and health span. And so it's really interesting to hear you guys talk about it in terms of a practical sense. And now you're eating this enormous, because I've seen what Robby eats in a day. He's got some amazing YouTube videos. I've got one in particular I need to probably pin or link somewhere that I love to watch because he goes through his entire day and he's keeping up with his glucose. His glucose is just rock stable the whole day. And he's just eating pounds and pounds of fruit. And it's really amazing to see that. So, talk about what a typical day looks like for two of you, because I think people will be really surprised.
Fascinated, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So Robby and I tend to eat a lot of fruit. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I trained or I learned this whole system underneath Doug Graham, who taught me how to be a fruitarian. And so I kind of ate a raw food diet for the first, call it, 13, 14 years of my plant-based evolution. And then over the course of time, I decided that I wanted to start integrating more variety. So I added things like quinoa and beans and potatoes and squash. So on a daily basis, my breakfast is usually it's 100% fruit. I'll start out by eating one of those big Meridol papayas that you get from Mexico, and I'll cut one of them in half. I'll de-seed it and I'll eat the entire thing in combination with maybe one or two plantains. Because I live in Costa Rica and I can get access to this stuff very easily. So that'll be my breakfast. And then I'll go to the gym. I'll go work out hard for an hour. I'll come back and my wife, Kylie, is a doll. And she
is.
We love her.
She makes me this giant smoothie bowl when I get back from the gym. So this smoothie bowl is basically a combination of mangoes and papayas and banana and or plantains mixed together to form a base. And then on top of that, we'll chop more of those same fruits, and then she'll serve it to me, and I will eat my way to pure happiness. So that takes care of breakfast number one, breakfast number two, and then lunch rolls around. Surprise, surprise, I will eat another fruit bowl. And people by this point might be like, come on, you can't just be eating all fruit all day long. And the answer is no, I don't necessarily do that. However, I do find that the more fruit I eat, the better my blood glucose, the more stable my blood glucose is, just like you had talked about earlier, Ray. And it's also a really simple way to stay very high energy all day long. Extremely simple way to stay high energy. So for lunch, I'll basically eat another bowl that's got maybe some more plantains and maybe some more papaya. If it's mango season, I'll easily eat 6, 7, 8 mangoes per day. No question. Then snack will roll around and I'll have something like garbanzo beans with tomatoes, or maybe some garbanzo beans and broccoli and cauliflower. And then dinner will roll around, and that's usually when I go pretty vegetable heavy, because by that point I've gotten the sort of like bulk of my calories taken care of for the day. I'm a little bit more sedentary in the evening than I am in the middle of the day. So I'm not really looking for too much energy. I'm looking for what I call more fluff. And so my fluff meal is usually some type of bed of greens. Maybe it'll be a spinach or arugula or lettuce if I can get that. And then I will basically put every single vegetable that exists in my fridge. And that includes zucchini, cauliflower, broccoli, tomatoes, cucumbers, carrots, red onions, red hot chili pepper. And then we'll create some kind of vinegar-based dressing that's usually something as simple as like rice wine vinegar plus spices, or apple cider vinegar with a little bit of water and spices. Mix that whole thing up, pour it right on top, and I am a happy camper at that point.
Cyrus, I have to report, you guys, that Ray is sitting here with his mouth watering because all he wants is to live this lifestyle. I mean, his eyes are bugging out of his head.
She won't do the fruit thing with me, and I want to do it so badly. So I think I'm going to have to come camp out with you guys, where you make me do it for like a week or a month. I'm ready to come down to Costa Rica and make that happen.
Yeah, we told you.
Ray, you got to come to our next retreat, man.
I do. We've got to do a retreat together. I'm sure we could pull some people in from our audience as well. It would be great, if you hit us up on Twitter and on Instagram if you guys want to do a joint retreat with Robby and Cyrus down in Costa Rica. We'd love to make that happen.
And we told you guys this, but we want to tell our audience too that the whole sweets chapter in our book is based on. This was basically Ray's passion to, impress Cyrus and Robby.
So I used some of the rules of eating that they had used in the past, and I held up earlier. I held up for the video that we got here. I held up the fact that, of course, this is on here too.
There it is.
There it is.
1010 diet.
Absolutely,
cool.
Absolutely. So
it's funny because I'm looking at your sweet section as we speak. You got the cinnamon pecan fruit bowl, the lime mint papaya and jicama bowl, the frushi bowl.
Photography is just so beautiful.
Thank you.
I mean, these fruit heavy meals, I tell you, thank you for, putting them in the book.
Yeah. And so let's talk about this while we have you guys with the audience, which is, I think this is such a sort of a mind crash to think about. Here are two type 1 diabetics here. And that if you have the health span solution and go to the sweet section, this is how they eat every day. In fact, I was back and forth texting Cyrus during this time and having him check out some of the recipes I was coming up with and the combinations. And it was really amazing. It was really amazing to be able to do all these things. And the sweet section is not meant to be desserts. It's the sweet section are meals. These are anytime meals. And since we don't have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, since there's no calorie count or nutritional information anywhere in our book, just create your soup, salad, side, and sweets and eat it. Just eat it. And you heard the volume of food that Cyrus eats.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
When I first, in the first, 2 weeks, 3 weeks or so of transitioning to a fruit heavy lifestyle, I remember turning to Doug Graham at a certain point and I said, Doug, I feel like I'm cheating. And he goes, why? I was like, because I feel like I eat dessert for practically every meal. And he looks at me, he goes, Cyrus, I've been eating dessert 3 times a day for 30 years and it never gets old.
That's amazing. I love that.
Robby, tell us about your day. I've witnessed it too. It's really fun to hear.
Yeah. So my day, I eat 4 meals a day. Breakfast, and it's very simple. I eat fruits, I eat greens, I eat non-starchy vegetables, I eat some nuts and seeds, and some herbs and spices, and mushrooms here and there. That's what I eat. So whatever's in season, luckily I live in Santa Monica, so I get incredible produce at the local farmers markets here, and I get the best imports at the Los Angeles wholesale produce market. So I am very lucky to have access to high quality mangoes pretty much year round. So there's probably not a day that goes by that I'm not having mangoes. Even right now, I have Valencia Pride mangoes that are growing in Southern California. And I also have epic Atolfo mangoes coming from Mexico, Kents are still coming from Peru. So my mango situation is just on point right now.
Your
That's
body
great.
is so internationalized.
We need to take you on one of our Thailand events because you
Yeah.
guys would go absolutely
Oh, yeah.
crazy at a mango stand there that has like 30 different varieties. It's just amazing.
I can't wait.
Complete nuts.
So I have papaya pretty much year round as well, but whatever's in season. So right now, I also get good Thai bananas year round. Cavendish bananas are still good. Right now, white sapote is in season. Cherimoya is in season.
Yum.
So lots of sweet fruits for breakfast. I love figs. Oh my gosh, figs are amazing, but they're not in season right now. And then it's just a bunch of fruit and greens. And then for lunch, it's the same thing. I'm usually going to have some sweet fruit, some more greens, some non-starchy vegetables, whether that's zucchini or sugar snap peas, stuff like that. Then in the mid-afternoon, so maybe I eat breakfast around 9. I go to base camp from 8 to 8:45. That's my workout. I bike there. The class is 35 minutes, 10 minutes of abs. I bike home, and then I have breakfast. Consistency is very beneficial for people living with type 1 diabetes.
Yeah.
And it's not necessary if you want to live like a life where you get to do a lot of different things at different times. That's cool. You can absolutely make that work. But if you do things consistently, it really makes your dosing and blood glucose predictability to a whole nother level, which is really fun. So breakfast is like 9 o'clock. Lunch is going to be around noon. And then like 3:30-ish, I have a snack of wild blueberries, mangoes, bell peppers, tomatoes, and some green onion, and then some spinach, arugula, or lettuce. That's pretty much year round. Like that thing is like the exact same at 3:30. And then dinner is going to be a salad, a big salad with lots of romaine lettuce, maybe zucchini, maybe cucumber, cilantro, more greens, but still a significant amount of fruit. And that's going to be, lots of citrus. I get amazing citrus varieties here. Got Kishu mandarins today at the market, blood oranges. I like the sumos. Everybody can get the sumos at all the different grocery stores. So lots of good citrus. Of course, mangoes is pretty much a staple at dinner time. Lots of really good tomatoes. Oh my gosh, I love tomatoes. There's over 5,000 varieties of tomatoes. It's unbelievable.
Who knew?
And there's a lot of good ones in Southern California. And then some, green onion, stuff like that, herbs and spices, just throw that in. So that's dinner. And we actually did a webinar where we talked about calorie density. So we had a team member, Tara Kemp, at the time. She analyzed her food intake. Cyrus analyzed his, and I did mine. And I believe Tara had 8 pounds of food per day, 8 pounds of edible food. Cyrus was like 10 and I was 13. 13. Like, now you don't have to eat that much food if you don't want to, but we like eat. It's a lot of water. So I eat about at least 13 pounds of food per day. Cyrus jokes. He's like, I've never seen anybody eat as many greens as you eat.
That's impressive.
But
Juliana
your
loves
taste
greens
buds come
too.
alive too. Like spinach is sweet. This Bloomsdale spinach that I get at the Santa Monica Farmers Market, it's absolutely sweet. And you learn that when you chew lettuce, you can feel the oil in your mouth. Like lettuce is actually kind of high in fat. It's like 24% or something like that.
Yeah, it's got like omega-3s in it too.
There you go.
Good
You can
kind,
taste those omega-3s, Juliana. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Yep. Wow. I mean, that's inspiring. I as a dietitian, I get these people that come to me often that have had a diagnosis of diabetes, even type 1, and the doctors all tell them the same thing, is just to chase the diet. Like, eat what they tell the parents if it's a child, like your kid can eat whatever they want and you just have to dose accordingly. And, because of that, you're seeing these people just, end up spinning into those vicious cycles, which you guys initially experienced, but fortunately were able to find your way out of. And it's, I find it tragic and horrible that that's the kind of information that doctors are giving their patients. It's so disempowering. And so, I often send people to you because you guys are the perfect, welcome, like, here's the pearly gates. And we have the hands to help walk you through this transition because it is so different and it is scary. And I can only imagine, I've seen so many people go through this. So you guys have turned this into a whole beautiful company and business, and you're coaching people. And tell us a little bit about how you came together, how that all evolved, and what you guys are doing, helping so many people.
Do you remember when the date of when we first met and we did that presentation with Lori in Oakland?
2010, something like that. Yeah, I don't remember the
A long
date.
time ago.
So
Just like you're saying, Juliana, we have created, when I was finishing grad school, I wrote down on a piece of paper exactly what I wanted to do with that education and with my own personal experience. And I wrote something to the effect of, I want to teach people living with all forms of diabetes around the world how to transition to a plant-based diet so that they can take full control of their health. That's literally what I wrote on a piece of paper. And I don't even know what I did with that piece of paper. I just kind of like tucked it away somewhere, and that was that. 5 years later, when I was moving out of my apartment in San Francisco, Kylie found that piece of paper and showed it to me. And she looks at it, she goes, "You're doing exactly what you said you were going to do."
Oh,
I was
I
like,
got chills.
I know. I didn't even remember having written that down, but the vision that I had at that time was very similar to the vision that Robby had at the time that he was finishing up his time working at Forks Over Knives. And it was basically that, just like you said, there are millions of people living with diabetes all around the planet, and their main resource, they have two main resources for information. Number one, their doctor, and then number two, the internet.
That's right. And
the internet is a circus. It's
Yes.
a complete circus when it comes to learning about diabetes, because you have everybody under the sun.
It's a complete circus on nutrition as well.
Yeah, it's a complete circus on nutrition, no question. And so if you're looking for a specialized version of nutrition, or sort of like specialized terminology and understanding for any given health condition, whether it's high cholesterol or pregnancy or type 1 diabetes, you name it, it's hard to really understand what to do, what is evidence-based and what is marketing. So what we wanted to do was create a platform that functioned as a one-stop resource where people could come and they could learn the science of diabetes and insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity. And then that we could also provide them with the tools to be able to put that information into play in their life immediately. And so that's why we created a coaching program, because the feedback we got from a lot of people was like, hey, I like your information a lot. I want to act on it. I want to transition my own diet. I want to transition the diet of my family. What the heck am I supposed to do? I don't know where to start, right? It can be complex, because especially when you're changing your breakfast, your lunch, and your dinners, and then maybe changing your athletic regimen, and you don't know how much food to be eating at any given time. Is it okay to skip breakfast? Should I not skip breakfast? Should I fast? Should I not fast? When do I check my blood glucose? What happens if it's high? What do I do about my medication? There's a whole bunch of different questions that can arise in this process. And that's why we basically have created a systematic, step-by-step system that takes people from where they currently are, whether they're eating a standard American diet or a ketogenic diet or anything that they can find, and it walks them step by step through the process of transitioning their diet to exactly what you guys have written in your book, The Health Span Solution, right? A whole food, plant-based diet, and teaches them the nuances of how to get there and do it in as simple and as guided as a format as possible. And since we've been, implementing this process now, we've helped, I don't even know.
Over 3,000 people have been through the coaching program.
3,000 plus people.
That's great. Yeah, and let me add in here just another aside to some of our listeners, because a lot of our listeners are really geeky into the science. What we didn't say earlier is that Cyrus's PhD was done under Mark Hellerstein, and that
Correct.
name for some people in our audience will be very familiar. He is probably one of the gurus of de novo lipogenesis. And I bring that up to say this: both Cyrus and Robby are amazingly lean and fit, and yet they're eating all of this quote unquote sugar. I'm not going to say the C word, I'll say sugar. They're eating starches and fruits, and the idea that sugar turns into fat, which is the concept of de novo lipogenesis, from new. Lipo means fat and genesis is to create. So creating fat from new, and in this case, from glucose. The idea that de novo lipogenesis is a significant source of the body fat you have on your body right now is really false. And, again, Hellerstein, if you go look at, his, PubMed, it's just, hundreds and hundreds of papers. I mean, he is a walking encyclopedia. I'm not overestimating in this, am I, Cyrus? I can't imagine having studied under him. I think that's amazing. But this isn't the issue. This isn't the issue. And a lot of people worry about this issue all the time.
100%. Mark Hellerstein is a real life Good Will Hunting. You seen the movie?
I agree.
With Matt Damon? Yeah. I mean, the minute that guy starts talking, I get out a pen and a paper and I start writing everything down, because the thoughts and concepts that come out of his mouth are too fast for my memory to record.
Yeah.
And so you're absolutely right. I mean, he's become, he's very well known as one of the,
and his papers read like this too. When I did a lot of work on this for oxidative priority paper, I spent a lot of time in his data for what he was doing, because we really wanted to be able to account for why is it that we're aggregating body fat under different mixed diet regimes, and the idea that sugar turns to fat and that insulin is the fat storage hormone, and that you know, when you eat sugar and you have all this insulin and it causes you to have fat, like this is really not how the body works. I mean, a lot of people believe this to be the case. And then they'll use as their alternative that they're swallowing lots of fat. How come I'm not getting fat, swallowing all this fat on a high fat diet? And that's because the pop-off valve for excess fat in your diet is the bile that you have. You have a limited amount of bile that you can produce. If you don't produce the bile to emulsify the lipids and bring them to the brush borders so they can be absorbed, they just simply come out in the toilet. So yeah, you're swallowing more fat, but sugars and amino acids, they actually get more fully absorbed when you eat them. But at the same time, one of the other things that Cyrus calls me up one day and he's like, typical, hey dude, what are you doing? I says, homie, what are you doing?
homie, what's happening?
Right. Hey homie, what's happening? Right. And so he's like, hey, listen, so, I got this question, like I've moved to Costa Rica and I'm eating like 1,000 calories less a day. And I just sort of can't explain like, what's going on here? Like, why am I eating these less calories? And I said, Cyrus, I just want you to stop and think about this for just a second. What is 1,000 calories a day? And when you divide it by 24, it's only 41 calories an hour. And so when you think about it, because a lot of his calories are glucose or starch calories or sugar calories, the body just has to ramp up by about 41 calories an hour and or shift over to be primarily glucose metabolism, meaning your respiratory quotient, going back to Kevin's podcast from us going up. So what ends up happening here is that it's not surprising that he moves from this cool San Francisco market down into this warm Costa Rican market, and he just has less appetite, being warm versus cold, has a little bit less appetite, eating less, but he's not losing weight. So losing weight and not gaining weight are two totally different things. And this is another thing I got out of Dov Graham's work is they focused all on what Robby was talking about earlier about calorie density. We sort of ignore calories on our side, but for a different reason. But the idea is you can eat a lot more food and not gain, but you won't lose. And this is an important point because for you, eating that more glucose is really what you end up having to do is manage the insulin dosage. And I want to point out, because I actually looked it up while we were sitting here just a second ago, but the video I want everyone to search for, it's under the Mastering Diabetes YouTube channel. So subscribe to that while you're there. And then I want you to look for What I Ate number 12, all blood sugar readings, 800 plus grams of carbs. I want you to watch this video beginning to end and explain if diabetes is caused by glucose. How did this day happen in Robby's life? Because he goes through it minute by minute, and there's really no way to explain what you're seeing there in terms of his glucose and insulin sensitivity and his amazing glucose control as a type 1 diabetic eating the kind of diet you just heard them both describe. And I say that because not that any of the four of us are recommending right now everybody become a fruitarian, or I call them fruitopians, right? I like fruitopians because it's like this, there's like this,
pearly gates right there.
There's this utopia version of it. But anyway, I love it. As Juliana said earlier, I am envious that I don't live that way more. I need to. And every time I get started, I get sidetracked on something else, those damn beans and stuff that come in. But anyway, I love the idea of doing it. I just wanted to, really bring all that together, unpack some of that and say that, all four of us are coming at this from a really solid foundation and from different vantage points. We all arrived at almost exactly the same place. And I find that really reassuring because, I came at it from a different place. Robby did. I know Juliana did, and you did, Cyrus. And I just think that that's amazing to me that it's so counter to what many people believe. And yet when we all rigorously tried to deal with our own situations, we ended up here.
100%. And, it really takes like a very analytical person to be able to sift between stuff that looks like it's evidence-based and stuff that is evidence-based.
And stuff to add to that, the stuff that your physician is telling you and your dietitian is telling you.
Bingo.
Which is not what you're saying and not what you experienced. And that's why once people get the diagnosis and they actually follow the instructions that they're supposed to do, they end up down that rabbit hole towards, the progression of the disease and all the what ultimately happens in that form of not treatment, of untreatment.
Yeah, exactly right. And, unfortunately, I think in the world today, there's a lot of what I refer to as like nutritional folklore. There's a lot of these fables that run around about, being protein deficient or having
even in the plant-based community. It's not just the American diet community. All diet communities have this folklore.
I fully agree with you. And there's no question about it. For people living with diabetes, the folklore centers around vilification of carbohydrate-rich foods. Don't eat fruits, don't eat potatoes, don't eat brown rice, don't eat quinoa, don't eat beans, don't eat whole grains because they contain carbohydrates, and carbohydrates are bad for you. Carbohydrates are evil. Carbohydrates will make you more diabetic. They will raise your cholesterol. They will make you fatter, and your blood glucose will become a nightmare.
And this is extended to even just the general population to avoid getting a diabetes diagnosis. Oh, I can't eat rice because it will give me diabetes.
Yeah, that's 100%. Crazy.
Yeah, and especially even this conversation about de novo lipogenesis, it's like that has become a more prominent conversation, especially in this world of low carbohydrate biology, because they'll tell you that anytime you eat something that contains carbohydrate, that your liver will convert it to fat, and then you will store the fat.
Right.
And so the eating carbohydrates makes you fat.
Right.
And, Mark Hellerstein and colleagues and beyond have drilled into this in detail using literally the most sophisticated biological or bioanalytical techniques available today using mass spectrometry in combination with stable isotope labeling.
Yep. And it's always, it's all showed the same. It's less than 4% of a conversion. And it's been demonstrated over and over in calorimetry, in those ways. Like you said, radioisotopes, mass spec. I mean, it's really amazing. And yet, by the way, I'll add this in, and since we'll talk more about our stuff we're going to do a podcast with them a little bit later on. So it's another week of promiscuous podcasting, this time with Cyrus and Robby. So, but back to like my story. Remember, I was type 2 diabetic. I was at the entry stages of it. I lost my weight because I was told that would help. That was the cold stress stuff that I lost my weight. And I was doing like a Body for Life, a Bill Phillips Body for Life program at that point. Lots of exercise, 6 times a day, and eating 6 frequent meals a day because supposedly that was stoking my metabolism, etc. But what I wasn't prepared for is that my type 2 diabetes got worse after I lost my weight. And that really was crazy. And it was that conversation with Dean Ornish that I've talked about on our podcast on more than one occasion. It was that conversation with him a little over a year later in 2009 at TEDMed. He and Ann were there, and we had this conversation about what was left in my diet. At that point, it was fish, mainly salmon, sometimes sushi, eggs, and what what was the last thing?
Yogurt and cottage cheese, which I bet
yogurt,
everyone
right.
could repeat now.
And
Because
so, and those three, when those three came out, suddenly I had perfect glucose control, which again doesn't make sense because everybody wants to focus on the starchy vegetables and fruits. So you won't get the C word out of me, guys.
So you guys just published a gorgeous book, and it's incredible. And it had this incredible debut so far. And tell us about it. We want everyone to get it.
So we spent over 2.5 years putting together what we consider to be the manifesto of diabetes meets plant-based nutrition. That's the way that we kind of think about it. And, it's called Mastering Diabetes. You can buy it, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, basically anywhere where they sell books. And the subtitle is The Revolutionary Method to Reverse Insulin Resistance Permanently in Type 1, Type 1.5, Type 2 prediabetes, and gestational diabetes.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that sort of makes our book different than a lot of the other diabetes manuals that are on the market today is that, number one, most of the diabetes books they're siloed, and they talk about one specific type of diabetes. So eat this way and it will help you control your blood glucose in type 2. Or read this book because it's specific to people living with insulin-dependent type 1. And we have focused our entire methodology not on any particular type of diabetes, but on the underlying condition that causes blood glucose variability, and that is insulin resistance. So we teach people what is insulin resistance, and we go into mad detail about what it is because there's a lot of folklore about it, but also because the actual nutritional biochemistry of insulin resistance, in my professional opinion, is fascinating. And once you really understand all of the players that are involved in creating insulin resistance, you then have the understanding of how to eat to avoid it, or more importantly, reverse it.
You also understand what's happening in the transition process when you may see some high blood glucose readings, which is such a big source of confusion for diabetes. It's one of the few conditions you can monitor on a meal by meal basis, which makes people even more confused because they do have experiences where they eat carbohydrate-rich food. They see a high blood glucose reading on their meter. They're like, well, how can you tell me that it wasn't the bananas that just made my blood glucose high? You got to be kidding me. I can prove it to you. But they don't understand the mechanism of what's going on. And when you have that knowledge, you become empowered to get through that and actually become insulin sensitive. And then you will no longer experience those unfortunate blood glucose spikes.
Yes, and so many of these examples, when we're changing from one diet form to another, it turns out that you might go through a transition period that you're off of where your goal is. And so this idea that, instantly I change my diet today and tomorrow everything's okay. With our clients, it's like 2 or 3 weeks before they get to a place where they actually feel comfortable, and they're obviously losing weight, so it's very focused on that. But the point here is that there's a lot of examples where short term you see a negative, what looks like a negative change, until the body has accommodated that, because the body doesn't have pumps and switches that turn on and off. It's lots of slowly evolved things, and you're habituated to certain things. So once you change that input, that habituation takes a long time to follow. And I think you guys see that in diabetes very acutely because of the insulin dosage you need to do.
No question. And in this book, we did everything we could to make sure that somebody could just pick it up, and it can be a manual that they just follow step by step, and they can avoid or limit some of those challenging experiences by picking one of 2 different meal plans. Depending on how insulin resistant they are at baseline, you can choose to tweak your food intake to really, blunt some of the blood glucose spikes you're going to see as you're going through that transition period. So we're really proud to have that. It's got 30 brand new recipes in there, a whole guide on how to shop, where to shop, a complete list of green light foods so people get to try new things.
And there's also a chapter which we're pretty proud about that goes into a lot of detail about oral and injectable diabetes medications. And the reason we wanted to go into detail about it is because your typical person living with diabetes shows up at the doctor takes a blood test, they get a high A1C value. The doctor says, hey, look, you have a high A1C. The answer is, I'm going to put you on metformin. It's the first line of defense. And then I'm going to graduate your dosage of metformin higher and higher if it doesn't work right away. And then in addition to metformin, I'm going to add a whole list of other potential treatments that are all pharmaceutical based, right? So whether it's an SGLT2 inhibitor, whether it's a DPP4 inhibitor, and we're just going to keep adding and adding and adding until we get your blood glucose controlled. And so unfortunately, a lot of people living with diabetes end up on this medication train to nowhere, where it's just one after another after another. And then they develop a whole collection of side effects as a result of it.
Right.
And so we went into detail about, what is each medication? What does it do? What's the molecular mechanism? What are the side effects? And then here's the best part. How do you get off of it? How do you reduce your dosage and how do you get off of it using, partnering with your doctor? And by doing so, your life is going to be greatly improved in the future.
Yes. I mean, that's just perfect. It's the opposite of what medicine is doing. I'm so glad that you have this as a resource for so many people. I mean, diabetes is just keeps going up in prevalence around the world. And I mean, it's just been like a roller coaster, and so it's great to have some kind of resource. And this is like literally everyone that's has a loved one or has been diagnosed or has been dealing with it should go and pick up a copy and check out. You guys have so many amazing resources out there. And, I love your name because what I was taught in dietetic school was managing diabetes. But you guys have learned and are teaching people how to master diabetes. And that's quite a subtle but powerful difference.
Very powerful.
So how do people find you guys and where do we want to send them from here?
Okay, so as far as the book goes, like Cyrus said, it's available everywhere books are sold. We also read our own audiobook, which we are super excited. It was so much fun. We got to add bonuses in front of each chapter to sort of talk about the behind the scenes, our thought process, what kind of happened in the writing process, which was really fun. We were able to add some extras in there, kind of like that were new information since the book was in, lockdown mode. You know how that goes. You guys have been through the publication process. So we did that. And we also have the book available on ebook versions. So that's Kindle, Apple Books, Nook. So you can get the book anywhere. And it's something we're really proud of. So check it out. You can find us on our website, masteringdiabetes.org. We have a lot of great information there. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. It's at Mastering Diabetes.
TikTok.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I've got to check that out.
we're just getting started, but Cyrus actually really enjoys the platform. So expect some good stuff coming soon.
My children are like, that's all I do. In fact, I did a little video with my daughter. I have to confess, it was hilarious.
That's so great. Yeah. I mean, the point is we want to reach people living with all forms of diabetes where they are. And there's a lot of young people living with type 1 diabetes who are using TikTok.
Yes.
And
That's great.
so we're going to be there to share our information and hopefully it resonates with them.
Love it.
Fantastic.
Well, thanks you guys so much for joining us and for all of your really important work. We're so grateful that you are here and for all that you do.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on this leafy green path to good health.
It's always the food. So remember, keep eating right.
Thank you for listening to Science and Saucery. For more details about the content in today's show or to contact Juliana and Ray, please visit us at healthspansolution.com.